I'm Roy from Roy's Garage. Today I'm going to be working on a 1991 Toyota Tercel 1.5 liter standard shift. I'm going to show you how to replace the radiator. These are the tools I'm going to be using today to do this job. A file, hose cutter, water pump plier, two different type flat tip screwdrivers, Phillips screwdriver, long nose plier, a regular plier, side cutters, 3/8 ratchet, two different 3/8 extensions, 12mm socket, 10mm socket, 1/4 inch ratchet, two different lengths of 1/4 inch extensions, 10mm socket, 8mm socket, 8mm wrench, airlift tool, vice grip, dielectric grease, RTV silicone, flush gun, silicone spray, brake clean, spray adhesive, anti-seize. These are the parts I'm going to be using today to do this job. Lower radiator hose with clamps, upper radiator hose with clamps, radiator cap, thermostat, thermostat seal, brand new radiator, and some Premixed 50/50 antifreeze. Okay, first I'm going to be removing this air intake. And there's another bolt in here. Okay, so this is the drain plug. It's going to be on the passenger side. So just open it up and drain out the antifreeze. Okay, so I'm going to be removing the upper radiator hose. I'm going to have to cut this tie strap off. So I'll be removing these clamps. Oh, the neck broke off. Right there. So I'm going to be disconnecting this electrical connector. This is for the fan. So I'm going to be disconnecting the lower radiator hose that goes to the engine. So now I'm going to be removing this overflow tube. Okay, so I gotta remove this bolt and this bolt, but this plastic grill is in the way. So what I need to do is unscrew these screws and then just move this plastic forward to get access to these two bolts. So now we get access to the bolts. So now I'm going to be removing this radiator with the fan. So I'm going to be removing the thermostat housing and the thermostat. There is two bolts, one here and one on the other side. You got to remove that to get the housing off. Once I get the housing off, I'm going to be removing the thermostat, and I'll be putting back the housing, and I'm going to be flushing out the block. No, I need to disconnect this wire. So I removed this thermostat, so I'm going to be putting back the housing. Okay, so just tighten up the housing. Don't have to be real tight, because we got to take it off. So I'm going to be transferring this fan assembly to the new radiator. So this fan is held on with 4 bolts, one here, one here, one here, and one there. Okay, I'm going to be installing the fan on the new radiator. So I'm going to be putting some anti-seize on top of my bolts before I put it on. Okay, so we're going to be putting on the lower hose. I'm going to be shooting some silicone spray inside the hose and on the radiator side, make it slip on easier. So I'll be tightening up the hose. Okay, so I'm going to be removing the mounts for the radiator, the lower mounts. So I'm going to be putting this onto the frame side of the vehicle. So I'm going to be putting the lower mounts in the frame. So I'm going to be removing the top mount from the radiator. This guy is really frozen. Okay, I'm going to be removing this plastic piece and transferring it to the new radiator. So I'm going to be putting this plastic piece on the new radiator. Okay, I connected the hose to the thermostat housing and I directed it away from us, so when we flush out the block it will shoot away. So I'm going to be connecting this guy on the top, and I'm going to be pumping water and air to the top. So I hooked up my flush gun to my water hose and my air hose. Now I'm going to slip this front part into the radiator hose. Now I'm going to let water go through. And then I'm going to be pushing the trigger down as we're pumping air through the system. Okay, so I stopped the water from coming out. Now I'm going to be pumping it out with air to get as much water out of the block. So I'll be removing these 2 hoses. So I'm going to be removing the thermostat housing again. So I'm going to be cleaning up the thermostat housing. Just scrape off all that corrosion. So I got some sandpaper, 80 grit, sanding off all the corrosion. So with a file, I'm just going to file it, get off the corrosion. Okay, I'm going to be cleaning the block side. There's a lot of corrosion on it. So with my razor blade, you just scrape it. So I'm going to be cleaning up this outlet. There's a lot of corrosion. You can scrape it and then later on sandpaper it. I'm going to be putting some anti-seize on the stud. So I'm going to be putting around my rubber seal around the thermostat. So I'm going to be putting my thermostat into the housing. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go glue it in because it's just falling out. So I got some contact cement. I'm going to be spraying in here and I'm going to be gluing the thermostat onto my housing. And just let it dry. Okay, so I'm going to put some silicone right around here. Just put a bead right around. Okay, so now I'm going to be putting the thermostat housing and thermostat on. But what I can do now is I'm going to be connecting this wire before we put it on. So I'm going to be bolting it up. We're going to be tightening up the bolts. So now we're going to be putting in the radiator. You got to line up the radiator with the mount. So we're going to be putting on these brackets. Put some anti-seize. Tightening the mount. Putting on the grill. So I'm going to be trimming my hose. It's a little bit too long. So with my hose cutter, I'm going to cut off maybe about that much, about an inch. So I'll be shooting some silicone spray in the hose, some on the thermostat housing. Putting my clamp on, now sliding the hose on. So I'm going to be tightening up the clamp. Okay, I'm gonna be connecting my fan, but before that I'm gonna put some dielectric grease. Now we can connect it. So I'm gonna be cutting my hose a little too long. So I'm going to be tightening up this clamp. So I'm shooting some silicone spray in the holes, some in the on the radiator. Slide it in. Tighten it up. So I'm going to be removing this coolant recovery tank and I'm going to be flushing it out. So I'm going to be cleaning out the tank. There's a lot of settlements on the bottom. Okay. So we're going to be installing the reservoir. Putting some anti-seize on my bolts. Okay, so we're tightening up these bolts. Okay, so we're going to be putting on this hose. So now we're going to be connecting the air intake. Putting some anti-seize on the bolts. So I'm going to be installing my Airlift tool. What this does is it vacuums out the system. Draws about 15-16 inches of vacuum. And then I'm going to be sucking the antifreeze right into the cooling system. That way there's no air in the system. So I'm going to be clamping off this hose. So I'm going to be hooking up my air. I'm going to be drawing a vacuum. You will notice this hose will collapse. Okay, that should be good enough. I'm going to shut off my valve. Disconnect the air line. Hooking this guy on. Opening up my valve. Now it's going to be sucking the antifreeze in. Like really quick. You don't want this thing to suck air, so shut it off before it gets to the very bottom. I'm taking it apart. So I'm topping it off with antifreeze. Okay, so we're going to be putting a new radiator cap. We'll be topping off the coolant recovery tank. Okay, so I started it up. I ran it through the heat cycle. I road tested for about 3-4 miles. Came back, checked for leaks. Let it cool down. and just recheck the fluids. Everything was all good to go. So if you have any questions, please comment below. Don't forget to subscribe, give me a thumbs up, and I see you in the next video. Aloha.